Welcome to the Freedom CEO podcast. It's about becoming the chief decision maker over your life in order to step into a life of freedom. From business, health, wealth, charity, and giving back to just doing life on your own terms. I am your host, Shay Invidiata. I am an award-winning activist, change maker, and a multifaceted impact entrepreneur with over a decade of experience in business, philanthropy, and health and wellness. In this space, I'm going to be bringing you insights, not just from me, but from incredible thought leaders around the globe to help you start making decisions towards living a life of freedom so you can live a life you love. Are you ready, guys? Because we are going all in. Robyn Towt is a 3-time cancer survivor who had a bilateral mastectomy and reconstructive surgery with silicone breast implants, which caused an array of debilitating health issues. Robyn had her breast implants removed just after 4 months of having them put in, and all of her symptoms completely resolved. Through her experience, Robyn has shared her testimony twice at the FDA in Washington, D.C., and has become the co-founder of Global Patient Advocacy Coalition, GPAC. Robyn has worked extensively with Arizona legislators in passing an informed consent law for breast implant surgery, and their GPAC team is currently working on similar legislation in several other states. Today, Robyn is a patient advocate, believing that every patient should be given the opportunity to make an informed and educated decision regarding breast implants, and that every patient deserves to have all of the information prior to having surgery. She had cancer 3 times and says having breast implants was worse than having cancer. Robyn Towt, welcome to the Freedom CEO podcast. I'm so happy that you're here today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So you have this incredible background of not just going through breast implant illness. You also are a cancer survivor. You have also gone up against what I think is some of the most challenging upward hill battles we can when looking at legislation, trying to change it. And I'm really excited to really dive into that part of your story. But I think it would be really helpful, and especially for me, to also just learn, where did you had cancer 3 times. Where did that really start though for you? Like, how long did you have cancer? Was it only breast cancer that you had? Because you had it 3 times. Was it 3 different types? Like, let's start with your journey, and then we'll get into some other good stuff too.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, unfortunately, it was 3 different cancers that I've had. My first cancer diagnosis was at age 23. Wow. I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. And to pick a cancer to get, it's a pretty treatable cancer. So I had radiation treatment pretty extensively, to basically from the tops of my ears down to my belly button. And the one good thing about my experience is I had a great oncologist who was very forthright with me. And he was open and transparent and told me that because I was getting so much radiation, I had a higher risk of getting secondary cancers later in my life. And I was really grateful that he gave me that informed consent, because it has allowed me to stay on top of my health, really know my body, since I've been dealing with this since I was 23, and to just know when something's not right and get it checked out. And luckily, all of the cancer diagnoses that I've had have been early stage cancer and very treatable. So I had a pretty good run after my first cancer for a few years. Got married, had kids, and had quite a bit of health problems in 2010, which my first cancer was in 1996. And it really followed the timeline of what he told me. He actually compared my radiation to, he likened it to victims of the Chernobyl disaster. And That was the disaster where the radiation leaked and these people were walking around just looking like normal people like you and I. But they had such extensive radiation exposure that about 10, 12, 15 years later, they were getting different cancers, thyroid cancer, lung cancer, brain cancer. So right along that timeline, I'm glad he shared that with me. I started having problems. I had problems with my thyroid. I had tumors on my thyroid. I had tumors in my lungs. I did have a unusual mammogram that I had to get a biopsy for, but the biopsy came back negative. So where I had really bad radiation burns, this was super interesting. I had basal cell skin cancer, only where my radiation burns were bad because I have dark skin, dark hair, and dark eyes. So I'm not really a typical candidate for skin cancer. But where my burns were really bad, I got some basal cell.
Wow.
So that was cancer. And I actually had that 4 times. And then in 2017, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I knew I was a high risk for breast cancer because of my radiation exposure to my chest. So I started getting my mammograms. I got the baseline mammogram at age 35. And then starting at age 40, I got a mammogram every year with an ultrasound as well because I was high risk.
Right.
Again, like really thankful for my oncologist who was transparent about this, and it led me to be really proactive about my health.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2017, when I had breast cancer, I was raising 2 teenage boys. It was almost time for them to both leave and go off to college. And it was just really bad timing for me. I mean, my first thought was, I don't have time for this, and being a cancer patient previously, I kind of didn't have that hit you like a ton of bricks when most people get diagnosed with their first cancer. Like they're devastated. It's, oh my gosh, why me? And, a lot of emotions. I was more matter of fact, like, all right, let's take care of this. What do we got to do?
Right.
So I made the choice to have a double mastectomy, which was a pretty aggressive surgery considering my tumor was super tiny. And it hadn't spread anywhere. But since I had that biopsy 2 years before, I was just worried that if it wasn't cancer then, it would be eventually. So I said, just take them both off.
Mm-hmm.
So that just easy for me to make. And I actually didn't want reconstruction because at my time of diagnosis, it was like 2 weeks before my kids were going to be out of school for summer break. And we're a very active family. We live in Arizona. We do a lot of outdoor activities. We love to go to California and go to the beach and just go hiking and swimming. And we had a boat. So I was like, I don't have time for this, to be in and out of surgeries. But my surgeons, pushed the reconstruction with implants on me because they made it sound easy. And they assured me that it's safe and FDA approved. So I had the double mastectomy with tissue expanders put in, which were excruciatingly painful. And I had those in for about 3 months to stretch the skin to get ready to have implants. And then I had implants put in August. So just 3 months later, and my health tanked.
Wow.
I didn't do chemo. I didn't do radiation. I didn't do any hormone therapy for my cancer. I literally just had surgery. And being that I've had health issues prior, I've had 14 surgeries. I've had C-sections. I've had multiple biopsies. I've had surgery on my lung, my thyroid. I always do great surgery.
Right.
But different. I mean, I woke up just knowing something wasn't right. Everything wrong. And it started right away for me. I had headaches and migraines the very first week. I was having difficulty breathing, difficulty swallowing. And I just broke out in this horrible rash on my chest and on my legs. I went back to my doctor 4 different times. Not once did she tell me it could be the implants. She just gave me pills. Like she gave me muscle relaxers, pain pills, sleeping pills, because I had really debilitating insomnia. I couldn't sleep. I would go to sleep at normal time, 10 o'clock at night, but I would wake up at 2 a.m. and I just couldn't get back to sleep.
It's crazy.
It was so strange, the symptoms I was having. And I couldn't figure out what it was. So I joined some breast cancer support groups and started asking questions. And a lot of the ladies were kind of echoing what I was going through, but they were blaming it on chemo and radiation.
When you went into that group, what type of questions were you asking? Like sharing your symptoms and saying, is this happening to anybody else?
Yeah, exactly. I would say, does anyone have rashes? Yeah, that's from chemo. I had an allergic reaction to the chemo or my port. I was talking about insomnia and the headaches, and they were all just blaming it on chemo.
Right.
And this because a lot of women that go on chemo, they have to take steroids, and steroids are known to, kind of mess with your sleep patterns. So I'm like sitting there thinking this does not add up. And there was actually a girl in one of those groups that lives right here in my hometown. And she reached out to me privately through DM and said, take a look into breast implant illness. Look at your breast implant. She's like, I had a breast augmentation for 12 years. 8 of those years, I was very sick. In the last 3 years, she was bedridden.
Wow.
And I was excited that I was like, okay, maybe I'll have some answers. And I said, sick how? She messaged me back her list of symptoms, and I was literally checking off every single one.
Wow, I have goosebumps.
I was shocked.
You saying that?
I was shocked, and then I was angry because
Sure.
I started thinking, okay, as a cancer patient, you have an entire team of doctors overseeing your care. Not one of them told me that this could happen. You have an oncologist, you have a breast surgeon, you have a plastic surgeon. I did meet with a chemo nurse, even though I chose not to do chemo. So none of them told me that this could happen.
Wow.
It wasn't informed consent, paperwork that I filled out. But as soon as she told me this, it all made sense. And I'm like, well, of course, it has to be that, because what else could it? So I made an appointment right away to have my implants out. I met with my original plastic surgeon first, but she didn't believe in the importance of taking out the scar capsule that develops around the breast implant when it's put in the body. And I didn't know a whole lot about breast implant illness at the time, but I did know enough that there were groups out there full of sick women, and they were talking about this capsule removal. And my friend that, I met online who told me about this, she actually worked for a plastic surgeon. So I ended up going to him for my explant surgery. And so I had my implants removed after just 4 months of having them in.
Wow.
And the most shocking thing to me was waking up from that surgery and feeling completely normal again, and being able to breathe. That sounds so simple, but I just can't tell you the weight of the heavy implants, and that silicone on my chest was like crushing my lungs. And I just felt like I couldn't get a good breath.
Yeah.
But then everything else disappeared. I was sleeping good again. I didn't have any more rashes. I didn't have any more pain. I had this burning pain in my chest, like there was acid inside of me or something. All of it was gone.
And what was it? I know you said it was basically immediate, but was it like 24 hours after surgery you started to really notice the difference? And like, what was your time frame where it was all gone?
Literally driving home from the surgery center.
Wow.
Just going through the symptoms, going, okay, I can breathe. So the first week was really the true test, because I was having headaches almost daily. Didn't have a single headache after that. No more rashes. No more pain. Oh, heart palpitations. I would be sitting on the couch doing nothing, and my heart would just start racing like I ran a marathon. Times I thought I was having a heart attack. So all of it was gone. And I believe it if I didn't live it, how quickly the symptoms came and then how quickly they left after getting them out. So I was shocked. I was elated because I felt normal again. I'm a 110-year-old woman on my deathbed. And then I felt like a normal middle-aged woman, that's raising 2 teenage boys and just keeping up with all the things that they're doing. But then I got angry, because if this happened to me, I'm sitting there thinking, how many other breast cancer patients are suffering with this, and they're blaming it on chemo and radiation, and they have no idea because their doctors didn't tell them either.
Right.
And it made me really angry because I felt betrayed. I felt lied to. And it was really a bad feeling for me. And that's when I just started advocating in these breast cancer groups. I started connecting with other women who were going through the same thing that I had gone through. And, I met with some local women here and thought, what can we do? This happened to all of us.
Right.
This shouldn't happen to anyone else. How can we fix this? And I'm like, I'm so angry that my surgeon didn't tell me. There should be a law. They should be forced to tell us.
100%. And I know you went back to her because you were saying you were having complications and she gave you the pills. Did you go back to her after surgery to say, this is my symptoms have changed? And like, what did she have to say about that?
I did. I went back for a follow-up. She had no idea that I had removed my implants with another surgeon.
Crazy.
So her completely flat.
Yeah.
And I tell her everything. And I brought with me a file like an inch thick of, studies from medical journals, excerpts from like the breast implant illness groups, everything. I brought her all the information I could find. And, I told her, I said, did you know that this could happen? And she said, well, I've heard of it,
Wow.
but rare. That
Wow.
word rare scares me to no end because it's not rare. There's literally hundreds of thousands of women, if not millions, that are suffering with this. And most of them don't even know it yet. They just think, oh, I'm getting old. I'm chasing around 3 little kids. I have a stressful job. I'm in a stressful marriage. I mean, we just explain it away, right? We're middle-aged, how we're supposed to feel. No, it's not.
Right.
I went an active, very energetic, busy mom to literally not being able to get out of bed. That is not.
No, it's not normal.
And, I'm fortunate that I figured it out early because it happened so quickly, so many symptoms so fast. Like I knew something was wrong. I feel bad for these women who the symptoms creep up, right? Because it's one thing just to have some headaches and migraines. You can explain that away and be like, I'm stressed. I'm holding my stress in my shoulders, so it's giving me headaches. I mean, my symptoms, I had like 24 symptoms starting the first and second week of my implants. So thankfully, I figured it out early, but these women where the symptoms just creep up 1 or 2 a year and they go for 10 years and then they become bedridden because they've just been piling the symptoms on top of each other. It's heartbreaking to me. And I really started researching how this happened because I'm a teacher by trade. That was what I went to school for. And I quit being a teacher to be a stay-at-home mom. But I love to learn and I love to educate. And I just kept thinking, how did this happen? In the 1990s, the FDA banned all silicone implants and they for over a decade. And it dawned on me, like, whose genius idea was it to put these things back on the market?
Right.
And a lot of people will say, well, saline implants, are safe because it's just saline water in there. And we see just as many cases of breast implant illness and breast implant related cancers with saline. Saline, silicone, textured implants, smooth implants, it doesn't matter. They don't discriminate. They all cause harm.
Yes. Well, and it's the shell, right? Like what is actually holding the saline, right? Like that's the most toxic piece from a neurological carcinogen standpoint as well, right? Like the makeup of what's holding the contents inside the actual implant, because I hear women saying that too. And I'm like, yeah, but you got to go through so much chemicals before you even get to what's inside. And like, that's what's cooking in your body. That's where that seepage is happening. And your body is trying to warn you. It's resilient and it's trying to say something is wrong. This is foreign. This is toxic and it shouldn't be in my body.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So it doesn't matter which implants anyone has. They're all silicone shell. And those silicone components are made up of very toxic and harmful chemicals. And I'm the type of person that I get these like thoughts that just pop into my head and then I take them and go down a rabbit hole and research them. And so one day, I was looking at the list of chemical ingredients in the breast implants that I had, which were Mentor. And I thought, I'm going to look up the stat sheet of these chemicals. And every single one I clicked on was either flammable, carcinogenic,
right,
caused organ failure, harmful or fatal if swallowed, can cause severe reactions, like all sorts of warning labels and warning symbols on these chemical sheets that I was looking up. And then they just mix it all together and make these silicone shells and fill them with silicone or saline. And then keep in mind, you're putting that silicone shell, no matter what it's filled with, in a body that's 98.6 degrees, and it's decomposing and degrading inside the body.
Yeah.
And those chemicals are leaching out of that shell into the body, above our heart and our lungs. Our thyroid is right here, all the systems that regulate our health. So it
Yes.
makes sense, right?
Yeah. 100%. I say to men and women, because men obviously need to be a part of this conversation as well. I think it's super important that, we're educating men on breast implant illness just as much as we are women. And I say this is just critically think. If you had a water bottle sitting in a car at, 40 degrees Celsius, 35 degrees Celsius, which is like, 85 plus degrees Fahrenheit for all of our American friends, and it was sitting there for even 24 hours, we know that you shouldn't drink from that bottle of water because the heat from the sun is cooking that water bottle and the chemicals are seeping into the water. And how much worse is it when it's not just one day, one time that you're drinking? It's literally sitting in your body, as we both know, for some women, it's 10 years. I had 2 sets over 11 years myself. And you hear too many stories of women that your surgeon is supposed to tell you to change them every 8 to 10 years. And there's countless millions of women that never do that. And they have them for 20 years, 30 years that are just sitting in their body, constantly cooking at that 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Like that is so hot. And when you break it down like that, I think for some people, you start to logically think through the problem there. And you go, well, yeah, that actually probably can't be good. Right?
Yeah. It is a common sense thing. I mean, and it's honestly, it's not just breast implants either. Speaking of men, we have a lot of men that have hernia repair surgery. Surgical mesh is a huge problem. And I actually, I started advocating almost 6 years ago now in the breast cancer space. Then I, integrated into the breast implant illness space. And kind of by accident, I met a couple of mesh harmed patients. You start getting in the harmed patient community and you meet all sorts of people that have been harmed by all sorts of medical devices.
Right.
And a couple of advocates reached out to me because they saw what I was doing with the legislation. And they were interested in doing similar legislation for mesh because they also did not receive informed consent.
Wow.
I kind of went down the mesh rabbit hole and realized that the more I started connecting with these mesh victims, we started talking about like the patient checklist, which I'll get into in just a second. We developed a symptoms checklist that people can go on our GPAC website and keep track of their symptoms that they're starting to have from their implants, or if they've explanted, they can start keeping track of which symptoms are resolved.
Right.
Decided to make a similar checklist for mesh patients. And as we were talking to these mesh harmed patients, we realized the illnesses are all the same. The Essure birth control device that was pulled off the market by the Bear manufacturer, I've talked to some of those women and their symptoms were identical to mine. And I met a couple of the ladies here at a dinner one night, and this woman was telling me her story. And I was just so shocked listening to her story. At the end of her journey, I said, "Are you sure you don't have breast implants?" She said, "No, I've never had breast implants." Literally, these implant illnesses are all the same.
Okay, so can I ask you, because for some people listening or watching, however you're tuning in, it's obvious to you because you've lived through this and it's also now in your world. But I'll be honest. So I had a hernia when I was like 6 years old, something like that. And I work with an incredible scar woman for my scars from removing my implants. And so she asked me, this is literally in November of 2022. She's like, do you have mesh there? I was like, what? She's like, do you have mesh? I was like, I don't know what that is. I didn't know what it was. And so I would love for you to just explain when you're talking about that mesh, like one, what is it? Two, it's being done in surgery, but just walk us quickly through that process so that maybe some people are like me who had no idea.
For sure.
Yeah.
So I unbeknownst to me, like I've seen the commercials about mesh, right? Where people are like, do you have pelvic mesh? There's lawsuits going on. Basically, mesh is the best way I can describe it is in your home or your apartment or even a hotel. If you look out a window, there's a screen on the window so that bugs don't come in or leaves, during a storm. Mesh looks almost just like that. So if you picture a window screen, that's what mesh looks like. And there are many different kinds of mesh from many different manufacturers. They come in all different sizes and different shapes. But the purpose of mesh is to repair tissue that has been damaged so that we don't get a hernia or an abdominal bulge. So the interesting thing about mesh, okay, there's biological mesh, which is made from either human cadavers, and you might have heard terms like alloderm. That is human tissue that they decellularize it and then use it in patients in surgery, basically to stabilize any tissue that has damage and needs, stabilization, like hernias. And then so the other biological mesh can be made from pig or cow.
Gross.
So then there's synthetic mesh, and the majority of those are made from polypropylene, which is plastic. It's plastic mesh. It's almost just like your window screen or the bag of oranges that you buy at the grocery store that come in that mesh bag.
Yes.
Think of that, but little smaller holes. Like that's the thing. And, plastic doesn't belong in the human body. It's an endocrine disruptor. It's carcinogenic, like all the chemicals that are in it. And we have so many warnings on plastic items now. In the state of California, they have a whole list of stuff. And if any of those ingredients are in it, there's a warning label on it if you purchase anything in a store in California. So those are the different types of mesh. And years ago, they used to repair hernias with just native tissue repair. We have, 26 or 29 feet of intestines in us. They would take like a little piece of intestine and use that tissue or that, the material, and then they would suture a hernia closed. And patients have been fine having hernia repairs for decades until mesh was invented.
Wow.
And mesh was invented, and it makes surgery so much easier for these doctors, right?
Sure.
Because think about it, it really takes artistic talent and skill and a lot of time in the operating room to surgically and manually fix a hernia, which a hernia is basically a hole in the tissue, and you need some kind of reinforcement. So when mesh was invented, it was like, oh, this is so easy. There's a hole in the tissue. We're going to slap a sheet of mesh on there, sew up the patient. The whole procedure took 30 minutes. And we just made triple the amount of money that we would have had to spend doing a 5-hour surgery to repair this naturally, like they've always done in the history of medicine. But what they didn't do, just like breast implants and other medical devices, is they haven't been following those patients closely. They never gave those patients informed consent. And when those patients started reacting to the mesh, it's just been a free-for-all, just like breast implants. And the problem with mesh is the mesh starts to disintegrate and dissolve into the body and migrate, and it's almost impossible to remove. Not only that,
it actually breaks down because of how tiny it is. Like it's not that it breaks down, it's breaking apart into pieces and then infiltrating through the body.
Exactly. So go look at a house that was built in 1920 that has original screens on the windows. They're shredded, right? That's what happens to the mesh in the body. And unfortunately, because this procedure became so easy and so mainstream, all the medical schools are teaching doctors how to perform this surgery. Just slap on the mesh, slap on the mesh. They're not teaching them how to remove the mesh if your patient has a problem. And don't think that the pharmaceutical companies that make the mesh, Johnson & Johnson, Boston Scientific, all the big names, Alloderm is made by Allergan, the same company that makes breast implants that are harming everyone. All of those companies are pushing their products in medical schools. They're pushing their products in teaching hospitals. They're pushing their products in conventions and medical conferences where surgeons go to learn and get CME, continuing medication or medical education credits. They're just pushing. They have billions of dollars to spend lobbying to sell their product. and get their surgeons trained to use their product. It's easy, it's fast, it's easy money, just like breast implants.
And Big Pharma, right? Like the biopharmaceutical industry provides 75% of the FDA's drug review budget. And so when I have conversations like this with people, because it's baffling that the FDA would approve something, then ban it, and then come back on. And we saw that in 2006, and there was really only 3 major pharma companies, and J&J was one of them, that got the approval. Yep, you can use breast implants again. And it's like, well, why did they decide to give that stamp? And you have to ask the question of following the money. And when you realize that companies like J&J contribute to 75% of the FDA's drug review budget, you start to see the obvious, like what is confusing becomes so much more clear when you're speaking about pharma being able to push their products in medical school and how that even gets allowed. Like, how does that even get passed? But it's this vicious cycle that they're the ones funding the FDA, and therefore the FDA is really not reviewing and approving things. They're being told what they're going to put their seal of approval on. And then therefore that eliminates the liability against these device manufacturers. As you know, way better than me, you know this all too well, right?
Yeah. And, there's actually a great documentary that talks about all of this. It's called The Bleeding Edge. It's on Netflix. Mm-hmm. And it talks about the FDA approval process. And it's not only a problem that their user fees from these device companies, basically pay the FDA. What's more disturbing is these device companies don't have to do proper testing, safety to get their device on the market. There's something called the 510K loophole that if there's a product on the market that's similar to the one you want to put on the market, they just kind of sweep you in. Like, oh, it's good enough and it looks like this, so we'll just go ahead and let you in. I have a huge problem with that because these companies, all of these people now that are coming out and speaking about having been harmed by these products, and then we go back and look at how they were approved. It's wrong. They need to go back. They need to put a halt on these device companies and make them prove their safety. And a lot of the long-term studies that these breast implant manufacturers were supposed to do, they never completed. And the FDA just gives them a slap on the wrist. They were supposed to follow like 40,000 patients, and they ended up following 8,000 patients.
Wow.
I mean, millions of women that have breast implants, that is not acceptable.
No, at all.
Now that we have like all these announcements coming out that all these cancers are being caused by breast implants, now we have a huge problem because now we have 15 to 20 million women walking around the world with breast implants that have no idea they could cause cancer. And by the way, this latest cancer the FDA has been talking about, it's not a new cancer. I never use that word because the case studies I was reading were like from 2010, 2003. So they've known about this.
Right? They withheld.
Absolutely. And same with the surgeon societies. They withheld it too. So the scary part about this new cancer that they're talking about is the average onset of this cancer is 22 years after getting your implants put in.
Wow.
And if you think about it, the silicone implants just came back to the market, 18, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. We're just going to be seeing the tip of the iceberg on these cancers.
Yeah.
This cancer is very aggressive, the squamous cell carcinoma. I want to talk just for a second about that, if this is okay.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
Squamous cell cancer is what most people know as a skin cancer. Mm-hmm. And it's a relatively treatable skin cancer. So the 3 levels of skin cancers that are most common are basal cell, which is what I had from radiation, then squamous cell, and then melanoma. So those are kind of the different degrees of intensity with these skin cancers. But this squamous cell cancer of the breast implant capsule is not the same squamous cell cancer that we see like on skin cancer patients. So it is an epithelial cancer that forms in the epithelial cells, but when it's inside the body in the breast tissue, it behaves totally differently. It metastasizes very quickly. It spreads like wildfire. It's highly aggressive. It gets into the bones, the rib cage, the sternum, the heart, the lungs, nearby organs, nearby tissue. And the worst part is it doesn't respond to chemotherapy or radiation.
Mm,
It's
God.
literally impossible. And that's scary because all of these women out there that have breast implants, it's caused by all kinds of breast implants, silicone, saline, textured, smooth. And the average onset is 22 years. Like,
Wow.
Now,
Do you think that if you, like, for example, we can use me, I only had mine for 11 years and removed them. Do you think that that I would still be prone to having something like that happen in like the 20th year, regardless of like mine, I just took them out at the 11th year. So like in 10 years from now, call it, or 9 years from now, that I should be aware that this is something that actually could materialize in my body or come out in my body?
I would say, I'm going to say yes. And here's why. We just had a presentation last night about this. One of the representatives from the American Society of Plastic Surgeons gave a wonderful presentation about these cancers. He's been reviewing all the case studies. So the case studies that he has, the lowest amount of years was 11 years after getting implanted. This patient developed it, and then up to 40 years. One patient developed it 40 years later. So,
Wow.
so the average is 22.74 years, anywhere from 11 to 40 years. Now, the right answer, I will tell you, is we don't know.
Sure.
We don't know yet because, we're still learning. But based on what I've seen with anaplastic large cell lymphoma, which is the cancer we refer to as BIA-ALCL, that was the cancer that got Allergan's textured implants recalled in 2019. Because out of all the manufacturers of breast implants have cases of that cancer, but Allergan had the most. So they chose to recall their product worldwide because they had, I think, like 80 to 86% of the cancer cases were from Allergan implants. So they pulled those off the market. But here's the problem. I've reviewed the case studies for the Allergan cancers and that ALCL cancer. We have patients that, like you, removed their breast implants, but 2 years later, 3 years later, 6 years later, were diagnosed with ALCL, even after they implants gone.
Wow. So scary.
Now, I do want to say the cases I know of that were diagnosed after explantation, their capsules were left in. So,
thankfully, mine were not.
yes.
Thankfully.
So that is why it is super important if people are getting their breast implants removed to make sure they find a doctor who understands the importance of removing that scar capsule. Because think of it, our body builds the capsule of scar tissue around the implant as a defense mechanism. This is a foreign body in our body, and our body says, no, we don't want it. So it's going to wall it with this scar tissue, and all of the chemicals that we talked about with that shell breaking down and degrading, they're seeping into that capsule that our body's protecting us with. Mm-hmm. So it's like a lot of us advocates talk about, like, when you take your trash out, right? If you like to cook or bake, your trash can is disgusting at the end of the day. And, you've got coffee grinds in there and eggs and banana peels. When you take your trash out, you take the whole bag and you throw it in the trash bin. Mm-hmm. Just dump it out and leave the stinky, sticky bag in there. Like, that's literally what you're doing if you're leaving capsules in.
Totally. And that's developed mold, bacteria, calcium. If you ever go on any surgeon's website that is removing implants, you see so many of it. It looks like, I explain it as like paper mache, right? Like, it's so hard to break. And it's that calcium buildup in the body within that capsule. Yeah. And when you think, and it's a great analogy, I've used it before myself, where you think, like, I would not bring back that nasty garbage bag to then reuse over and over again, but keeping it, I would never do that. And then expecting that somehow it's just going to clean itself, or that the garbage bag will just like break down and I'll get a new one, and therefore in the body that it'll break down and it'll be gone and your body will flush it out. When you look at how hard that is, your body's been trying to do that for 10 years, whatever the amount of time is. And even if it could break it down in the body, and this is what I say to people too, even if it could break down, you're still leaving the chemical residues. you're still leaving bacteria, mold, and the calcium. And not everybody has each of those. We all have the chemicals. And, I had a pathology report done on mine, and thankfully I didn't have mold buildup, but I had bacteria buildup and I had chemical residue. Mine weren't calcified, but regardless, it's not good for your body. And why would you want to leave that in your body? Even if it's just a little bit, it's a little bit too toxic.
Absolutely.
And you need to take it out, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's like when we drink our water, it's, well, there's just a little bit of arsenic in there. Okay,
Right.
that's acceptable. Like, no, because eventually you keep drinking little bits and you're going to get sick and you're going to die. So, which by the way, dick and breast implants. So fun fact of the day.
Right?
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, because I feel like you and I could definitely pull a Joe Rogan and we could talk about all of this stuff for like 3 hours. And it's so important. I would love to highlight, obviously, it's very clear you are not just a freedom warrior for yourself, and you are such a strong woman, overcoming cancer 3 times. And now you are in this physical fight, literally, for other women. You're going up against legislators. I have shared with you before, with my organization, that's a nonprofit that fights human trafficking, and there's a lot of human rights issues with that. So I understand the heaviness, the hardship, the blood, sweat, and literal tears, death threats. I don't know if you've experienced that, but having these major challenges for something that is so obvious that you shouldn't be needing to fight for, that you have now devoted this next chapter of your life to trying to change legislation. And I commend you for that. I thank you for that. And I would just love for you to share, what that journey has been. And also then like what's next, with that, where are you going to go?
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for doing the same for your cause, because I do know the grueling work that goes on behind the scenes. It's very eye-opening. And I'm not sure, sometimes there's so many different factors that drive my advocacy, anywhere from anger to just my competitive nature. We're a very competitive family. And just, I'm a Libra. Like, I want to be fair and balanced. And what's happening is not fair. It's not okay. It shouldn't be legal. It's very corrupt. So we just need to expose it and change it. And then the only way to do that is honestly just take the reins. Just take the reins. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't care. I was going to try. And it might not work, and it might not have worked, but I'm going to go down swinging every day because it's just the right thing to do. Yes. So many people suffering, and there's so many women that are still sick and they can't fight this fight. They don't have the money to even get their implants removed. So they're still sick. And that breaks my heart. So if I'm physically able to do it and I'm capable, then I'm going to do this fight. But the most shocking piece for me is finding out the money trail behind all of this. 100%. And the people that are pushing back the most against my legislation, against my efforts with the FDA, are plastic surgeons that have literally taken millions of dollars from these breast implant manufacturers. They have put forth bogus, false studies. I'm saying that publicly because I know they're false. I've seen the real world data, and I've seen what their studies show, and I've read their testimonies at the FDA hearings in the early 2000s. They lie. They manipulate the data.
Sure.
They cheat the system. And there's a very small group of them. It's like a cartel. In fact, they probably don't even know this, but their own colleagues call them the breast implant cartel.
Wow.
So, yeah. And I actually wrote an article about it, and I started really digging up information on the people that have been behind this for the last 35 years. And it's shocking.
We're going to include that in the show link. So definitely when you're finished listening to this, I'm going to include that so you can go read that article, because that is going to be so powerful and educational to understand.
Oh, yeah. It's super fun to learn. And, it's interesting because, you start just following the money trail, and then it all makes sense, and at the end of the day, they just don't want to lose their cash cow.
Totally.
And, they're probably prideful people too. I mean, nothing feels more stupid than the fact that you've spent the last 30 years of your life shoving toxic breast implants into people that's causing cancer.
Yeah.
Of course you're going to push back a little because, you don't want to look stupid. But honestly, I commend the doctors that when they know better, they do better. They've come over, they sit with us at the same table and have meetings with us and talk about, what are you seeing in the patient community? Because we have a very closed patient community for BII. And, it's unfortunate sometimes because they're not seeing all the things that I'm seeing in these support groups. Yeah. They're not seeing all the information and the patient data that we're literally looking at every day, but they need to know this information. So, it was kind of a step forward in saying, look, I've got information, you've got information, let's get together and share our thoughts and ideas. And honestly, working collaboratively like that is what's going to move the needle.
Totally.
I mean, I've had to work collaboratively with people sitting across the table from them who I completely disagree with. Mm-hmm. And just hashing out language of the bill, which how grueling that is. Yes. Every little word. I mean, literally, we had 3 words that I think we fought over for 3 hours, calling the FDA a black box warning or a boxed warning. Right. So just little stuff like that people don't know goes on behind the scenes. And you have to swallow your pride a little bit. You have to make some concessions. But at the end of the day, I hope that everything I do reflects what's in the best interest for patients. Even if I have to, reach across the aisle and work with the people that aren't my favorites. Yes. Because I get it done.
And it's very challenging. And like you've said, I have gone through it, and even within my own team, within my own organization, never mind other stakeholders when we're talking about a bill. And the most important is to focus on what the common goal is, and that we can all agree on to make that change. Robyn, you said, talking about the money and following that trail, I think it's really important to just kind of note for some people, again, when we're talking about like just starting to critically think and connecting the dots around Big Pharma, the FDA, why it's taken them until 2020 to actually even put the black box or just the box warning. I don't know what you guys decided, but the box warning label, no different than that you would get on cigarettes, is now on the implants. It's taken them that long to just even do something as simple and as obvious as that. And when we're looking at the money, it doesn't just end with the implant procedure, or in your experience around cancer patients that have gone through radiation treatments and all different kinds of treatments to try to alleviate cancer from the body. But typically a woman who is experiencing breast implant illness, BII, will end up seeing 10 to 40 different types of doctors, right? Over the course of maybe a few years. In my specific case, my story, I spent 4 years biohacking my body. And if I had to quickly calculate, I'd probably say there was like 8 different doctors, dermatologists, my own surgeon, naturopaths, like all kinds of different people. I was going to try to figure out what was going on in my body. What is the root cause of this illness? And not one doctor, not one person. And some of them are like great people, like my naturopath, like she's amazing. But she at the time didn't know any better. And because they're not talking about it in the medical community the way that they should be. And women like you are going to be changing that in the future to come. I really do believe that. And all of women who are sharing their stories, which is why, we're talking today, and the importance of doing that and raising the awareness and education. But you think of how many different prescriptions, even if they're holistic, right? Like homeopathic, you're still spending so much money, typically though, in the big pharma realm to deal with anxiety, depression. If you have insomnia and you can't sleep, you're on sleeping medication now, looking at your diet, you're going to a nutritionist, all of this stuff. that really, again, it's another revenue stream for Big Pharma.
Isn't it the most genius business plan ever?
It really is. In the evil world, yes, it's really genius.
And then sell them the cure. And of course, it's absolutely, I mean, it's an evil plot twist, but it really is a good business plan. You have to give credit where credit is due.
Well, and sorry to interrupt you, but they're not giving us the cure. They're giving us things to cope with the symptoms we have.
A Band-Aid.
Band-Aid. Yeah. And they're treating symptoms as opposed to looking for the root cause. And, I will never, ever forget, I was 17 years old and Chris Rock had just put out a new stand-up comedy. Okay. It's called Bigger and Blacker. I was like 16, 17 years old. And he just actually put out a new one on Netflix that my mom, of all people, told me. She was like, do you know who Chris Rock is? I'm like, yeah, how do you know who Chris Rock is? Nonetheless, what I love about Chris Rock is he takes a spin on factual, maybe controversial ideas, and he makes you laugh about it. But at 17 years old, it really stuck with me. And he said, they will never, ever find a cure for cancer because there's no money in the cure. The money's in the medicine. It's in the medication to cope with it. And that's what he says in his stand-up, in this stand-up act that he does. He says they're just going to give you stuff so that you can cope with it, so you can live longer with it, but they will never, ever give the cure.
Exactly.
And I'm 38 today. And almost verbatim, like I remember that. And I'm like, there's so much wisdom. There's so much truth in that. And going back to your point, it's evil, but it is a very brilliant spin. It's a brilliant business model where it just self-perpetuates, right? The bigger the problem, the bigger you treat it with things that are not actually going to cure it, but just help you cope with living.
Yeah. And how do we fix that? That's where my brain goes and that's why I started looking into the people that are responsible for this, because in the United States, we have something called the Sunshine Act, where we can go on a website, a government website, and plug in any doctor or surgeon's name, and we can see how much they've taken from drug companies and how much money they've made, and basically kickbacks. They call them like gifts and, travel expenses and stuff, but really know what it is. And that is when I started connecting the dots, because I started looking at the studies that were being put forth saying breast implants are okay for the market. And then I started researching the people that were doing those studies. And then I'm like, well, they took $800,000 from Allergan. Of course, to show this. And that's really when I started connecting the dots, is when I started connecting with other people who were not looking at those studies, were not looking at the FDA and the plastic surgery community. They were looking like rheumatology journals, autoimmune, diseases and the root causes, and human adjuvant diseases, connective tissue disorders that are caused by chemicals and toxicity. So when you start looking at the real science, not the science that's bought and paid for by Allergan and Mentor and Johnson and Johnson, you start really finding the truth. And I think my biggest frustration is exactly what you just said. Your experience and your story, you went to 12 different doctors, good doctors, smart doctors that had no idea about this. Do you know, I personally have been asking the FDA for 5 years now to please just put out a healthcare provider letter. Like, we had a big meeting on it about 6 months ago. Just letting all medical professionals know that any implantable devices can cause a systemic reaction, because not everybody's body can tolerate that. They have put it on their website, so it's out there as public information. But I'll be honest with you, I know some amazing doctors, but nobody I know, even my nerdy self, doesn't spend their spare time perusing the FDA website, which is very difficult to navigate anyway. So need to take it a step further. They need to let these practitioners know, because how many doctors are these women going to that don't know? And if they knew, these women could be helped so much sooner. They could save money. They could save insurance costs. Insurance is paying billions of dollars for these sick women. And it just shouldn't be like that. The whole system is broken. The FDA can very easily, I actually wrote the Dear Healthcare Provider letter and said, here you go. I did it for you. It'll work for you. Just post it.
Right.
Just to all the medical providers. So that was a very interesting meeting that would probably take a whole nother podcast. Just
let's do that. We'll do that. We'll do part 2 for that.
Oh, yeah, it's frustrating because they have the power, the authority, and the jurisdiction to do it.
Technically they do, but I personally believe that they're being told what to do, that they actually don't hold the authority, because if they put a stamp and say no to something, then their funding gets cut. And there's a lot of billions, we're talking billions and billions of dollars. And this is just one segment of the big pharma industry, right? Like, this isn't getting into conversations around autism and all other kinds of health problems that we're seeing majorly rise. Like, when you just quickly compare autism in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s to now, that's a whole other podcast. But just then tackling that issue, right? So this is so big, it's so grand. And for them to say no, when it starts costing billions of dollars, it kind of feels like a movie, but people start disappearing. They suddenly have heart attacks and they start disappearing. And then all of a sudden, something that was going through an appeal to be disapproved is approved after that person has suddenly had a heart attack or has suddenly disappeared. Like, there's all kinds of very complex issues when we're talking about the FDA and big pharma. Robyn, I want to ask you this because this took me for a spin. And since you and I are talking today, I just thought I would ask you. Motiva is using microchips in their breast implants. For the life of me, I can't understand why they would be doing that. What's the purpose of that? What is the need of that? And because there's no patient-informed consent around what makes up an implant and the health risks around it. We all had surgical consent, right? What could happen on the surgical table? And we know about those risks. Do you know, are patients being informed that there's a microchip that is in that implant that then goes in them? That's my first question. And the second question is why? Why do you need a microchip in a breast implant?
So to answer the first question, some patients did say they knew that it was in there. I've talked to a few patients that said, I had no idea there was a microchip in there. So I'll answer your next question in 2 parts. Why is there a microchip in there anyway? Motiva claims it's for patient safety, because women are so stupid, they lose their implant card, and they don't know what implants they have. So if we put a microchip in them, we can scan it and get all the information, the serial number, the number. And that way, if there's a recall, we can notify you, or if there's a safety concern, we can notify you. So that's what they're pitching it as and marketing it as. What they're not telling people is there's actually published literature in medical journals about how RFID chips cause cancer. Fun fact. And, I think Motiva is trying to market their new breast implant as, all the other ones, all these problems that we've had, and you've heard the chatter going on since 2019. Ours is the new, latest, and greatest safe one. And we're all about women's health and safety. And at the end of the day, anyone who loads up, 40 plus toxic chemicals in a bag and shoves them in human beings, in a human body, knowing they're carcinogenic and toxic, that's not women's health. That's not health and safety
at all.
That's how they're marketing it. But I've actually dug up a lot of information on Motiva as well. And that's a whole nother podcast. Like, we need to do part 2, part 3.
I'm here for that. Let's do that.
Yeah. And I'll send you a really great article about that too. Here's another fun fact. Motiva is getting ready for their US launch because they just finished their clinical trials in the United States. And so now the FDA is getting ready to approve them. And they recently hired a guy who was fired from Sientra breast implants.
Wow.
Because he was falsifying safety data and destroying it. He actually was sued by the SEC for that. and was banned for holding any like important positions in a company like CEO, director, etc. for 5 years. 5 year ban at SEC.
Wow.
Motiva just hired him to be their consultant.
Wow.
So
That is a fun, corrupt fact.
why would you hire someone who knowingly hides and falsifies safety data?
Mm-hmm.
That's just about.
Well, I'm going to leave that one for the next episode because that question alone opens up so many other important questions that people should be asking. Even just looking at over the past 2 years, there's a lot of links that have happened of people who've been let go and now are hired on as presidents of new companies in Big Pharma. So it's pretty wild how this is all interlinked. And one of my favorite quotes, and I've actually seen it on your Instagram as well, so I know that you share it too, is it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled.
Yep.
And it's, that cognitive dissonance, really. And until it happens to you, oftentimes, that's not really, and it's fine if that's the story, right? To like learn trial and error. But I always say it's more wise to learn from other people's mistakes or other people's experiences. And that's my desire in sharing my story and speaking with you and sharing like your story, is that it would cause inspiration. It would invoke courage and also guide women to be going, wow, yeah, I have gone and seen 8, 10 different doctors and still nobody knows what's going on. And
Right.
so like I had an aha moment, and I'm going to go maybe now look into what you're saying. So Robyn, I'm so grateful for your time. I'm so grateful for you being here. I have a question, the last question, to just everybody who comes on the Freedom CEO podcast. I love hearing their perspective. And because we're talking about implants, even though you only had yours for 4 months, how has taking ownership over the decision to explant for you, how has that brought freedom into your own life?
I love the word freedom because I use this phrase all the time: flat and free.
Oh, I love it.
I'm completely flat. So, I had a double mastectomy for breast cancer. So I have no breasts after I explanted.
Yeah.
And honestly, for the first time in my life, I feel free in my body. I was actually large breasted naturally before I got breast cancer. And it was cumbersome to me. So I feel free. I feel free of that nightmare, free of the whole breast cancer journey that all I wanted to do was put it behind me. So flat and free is one of the hashtags that I use when I talk about my experience, because literally I felt chained down when I was going through that. And not only that, when, for me personally, and I'm not judging, I respect everybody's choice, whether to reconstruct or not reconstruct. But for me personally, being a 3-time cancer survivor, reconstruction felt like just dragging out breast cancer over and over, because you're never done. Whether it's with flap surgeries or breast implants, you're never done. You're always going in for follow-up surgeries. You're always going in for revision. I was done. I just wanted to be done. I just wanted to be free. And now I am. And I love it. And it's the greatest feeling every day.
I love that. What a powerful way to just kind of conclude our incredible conversation. Robyn Towt, flat and free. Thank you for joining me today on the Freedom CEO podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been awesome.
Thanks for tuning into the Freedom CEO podcast. If you got value out of today's show, I would love for you to leave a review, as it will help my show reach other people as well. You know what to do. Download this episode, click the like and subscribe button. If you feel like spreading more love, hop over to Instagram and share today's show in your stories. Remember to tag Shane Vidiata and the Freedom CEO. My DMs are always open, so drop me a line. I'd love to connect. Until next time, keep owning your decisions to live a life of freedom. Live a life you love.